Daddy? The flight attendant's pendant is the same as Mom's in the photo. The millionaire turned around and froze. It was the pendant he had given his beloved 8 years before she disappeared. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Richard Hale's corner office on the 42nd floor, casting long shadows across polished mahogany. At 42, Richard commanded one of the nation's most successful hotel empires. Yet success felt hollow without the woman who'd once shared his dreams. 8 years. 8 years since Claire's plane had plummeted into the Pacific, taking with it the vibrant laughter that had filled their penthouse, the gentle hands that had cradled their newborn son, and the emerald green eyes that had seen straight through to his soul. He picked up the silver-framed photograph from his desk, Claire holding 2-year-old Ethan at the beach, her signature pendant catching the sunlight. The heart-shaped gold locket with its single emerald had been his wedding gift to her, custom-made by a jeweler in Florence. One of a kind, just like our love, he'd whispered, when he'd clasped it around her neck on their wedding night. Dad, Ethan's voice broke through his reverie. At 10, his son had inherited Claire's expressive eyes and gentle nature, though Richard often caught glimpses of his own stubborn streak in the boy's determined chin. "Are you ready? The car's waiting downstairs." Richard slipped the photo into his jacket pocket, a ritual he'd maintained for 8 years. Today's flight to Seattle was routine business, but he never traveled without Claire's image close to his heart. "Coming, buddy? You excited about seeing the new hotel?" Ethan shrugged with the casual indifference that only 10-year-olds could master. But Richard caught the spark of interest in his eyes. Despite everything, the kid was fascinated by the family business, asking endless questions about architecture and hospitality that would make any father proud. The ride to JFK was quiet, both lost in their thoughts as Manhattan's skyline gave way to the bustling chaos of the airport. Richard had built his empire on attention to detail, and today was no different. He'd specifically requested one of his company's premier aircraft, a Boeing 787 that served as both transportation and a showcase for potential investors inside the first-class cabin. Richard settled into his usual seat while Ethan pressed his face to the window, watching ground crews prepare for departure. The flight attendants moved through their pre-flight routine with practiced efficiency, but one caught Richard's attention. Not because of her professionalism, though she clearly had that in spades, but because something about her seemed familiar in a way that made his chest tighten inexplicably. She was probably 30, with auburn hair pulled back in a neat chignon and warm brown eyes that held a distant, almost haunted quality when she smiled. And she did smile at every passenger with genuine warmth. There was something behind it that spoke of sadness carefully hidden away. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said, approaching their row. Her voice carried a slight huskiness that reminded him of "No." He pushed the thought away before it could fully form. "I'm Olivia Grant, your lead flight attendant today. Is there anything special I can get for you or your son during the flight?" "We're fine. Thank you, Miss Grant." Richard studied her face, trying to place why she seemed so familiar. Had they met at some industry event? A hotel opening? But no, he was certain he'd remember meeting her. Ethan, meanwhile, had turned from the window and was staring at Olivia with an intensity that made Richard slightly uncomfortable. His son had always been observant. Claire used to joke that he noticed things adults missed, but this was different. There was recognition in his gaze, mixed with confusion that wrinkled his young brow. "Ethan?" Richard said softly. It's not polite to stare, but his son didn't look away. Instead, his eyes had fixed on something at Olivia's throat, just visible above the collar of her navy uniform. As she leaned forward to adjust the overhead compartment, a delicate chain caught the cabin lights, and Richard's blood turned to ice. "Dad!" Ethan's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a thunderbolt. "Dad, look at her necklace!" Richard looked, and the world tilted on its axis. There, resting against Olivia Grant's collarbone, was a heart-shaped gold pendant with a single emerald at its center. Not similar to Claire's, identical. Every curve, every detail, down to the tiny inscription he knew was engraved on the back. "Forever yours, R." "That's impossible," he breathed, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. But Ethan was already moving, unbuckling his seatbelt with trembling fingers. His face had gone white, his eyes wide with an emotion Richard couldn't name. Recognition, hope, disbelief all tangled together. "Excuse me," Ethan called out, his voice cracking with the weight of 8 years of missing his mother. Miss Olivia." She turned, that same warm smile lighting up her features, but as she met Ethan's gaze, something flickered across her expression, a shadow of confusion, as if she'd heard her name called by a voice that echoed through dreams she couldn't quite remember. "Yes, sweetheart. What can I do for you?" Ethan stood on shaky legs, his finger pointing directly at the pendant. When he spoke, his words shattered the careful composure Richard had built over 8 years of grief. "Dad!" The scream tore from his throat, raw and desperate, and filled with a child's unshakable certainty. "The flight attendant's pendant is the same one from Mom's photo." The cabin fell silent except for the steady drone of the engines. Other passengers turned to stare, but Richard saw none of them. His entire world had narrowed to the woman standing frozen in the aisle, her hand instinctively moving to cover the pendant at her throat. Olivia's face had drained of color, her warm brown eyes now wide with something that looked like terror mixed with desperate hope. "I'm sorry," she whispered, backing away from their row. I don't understand." But Richard was already on his feet, the photograph clutched in his trembling hand. He held it up so she could see Claire's smiling face, the identical pendant glinting in the captured sunlight. "Where did you get that necklace?" His voice was hoarse, broken. "Please, I need to know where you got that pendant." Olivia's breath came in short gasps as she stared at the photograph. Her free hand gripped the back of a nearby seat as if the world had suddenly become unsteady beneath her feet. I've always had it, for as long as I can remember, since..." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Since 8 years ago." The number hit Richard like a physical blow. 8 years. The exact amount of time since Claire's plane had gone down. "What's your full name?" he managed to ask. "Olivia Grant. I live in Phoenix. I work for..." She trailed off, confusion clouding her features. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I should get back to my duties." But she didn't move. Instead, she continued staring at the photograph with an expression that tore at Richard's heart. The look of someone trying to grasp a memory that danced just beyond reach. Ethan had begun to cry, quiet tears streaming down his cheeks as he looked back and forth between the photograph and the woman in front of him. "Dad," he whispered, "why does she have Mommy's necklace?" It was the question that would change everything. The question that would unravel 8 years of grief, expose dark family secrets, and prove that sometimes love really could survive even death itself. Richard reached out toward Olivia, then let his hand fall to his side. "I think," he said quietly, his voice shaking with possibilities he dared not name. "We need to talk." The flight to Seattle passed in a blur of whispered conversations and stolen glances. Richard had managed to convince Olivia to sit with them during her break, though she'd agreed with the hesitant confusion of someone walking through a dream they couldn't quite understand. Now, 3 hours later, as the plane descended through cotton-white clouds toward SeaTac Airport, Richard felt like he was drowning in questions that had no rational answers. "I'm sorry," Olivia said for the 10th time, her fingers unconsciously worrying the pendant at her throat. "I wish I could tell you more about where this came from, but I honestly don't remember." The doctor said it was normal. That trauma can cause selective memory loss. "What kind of trauma?" Richard asked gently, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. Olivia's eyes grew distant, as if she were looking through a fog that never quite cleared. "I was found in a hospital in Flagstaff, Arizona, 8 years ago. No identification, no memory of how I got there. The injuries were extensive: facial reconstruction, broken ribs, a severe concussion." She touched her cheek absently. "The plastic surgeons did amazing work. But I sometimes wonder what I looked like before." Ethan had been unusually quiet during the conversation, but now he spoke up with the blunt honesty that only children possessed. "You smell like my mom." "Ethan," Richard started to protest, but Olivia held up a hand. "No, it's okay." She looked at the boy with something that might have been recognition flickering in her eyes. "What did your mom smell like?" "Vanilla and something flowery," Ethan said without hesitation. "Dad says it was her favorite perfume, and you smell exactly the same." Richard's throat tightened. Claire had indeed worn vanilla and jasmine, a custom blend she'd discovered at a small shop in Paris during their honeymoon. He'd had it specially ordered for years after her death, before finally accepting that keeping bottles of her perfume was just another way of torturing himself. "I do wear vanilla and jasmine," Olivia admitted, looking puzzled. "I've always been drawn to that combination, though I couldn't tell you why. It just feels right somehow." The plane touched down with a gentle bump, but Richard barely noticed. His mind was racing through possibilities that defied logic. Could this woman somehow be Claire? The timeline matched perfectly. 8 years ago, found with no memory, extensive injuries that would explain why she looked different, but it was impossible. Claire's plane had crashed into the Pacific. There had been no survivors, no bodies recovered from that depth. Yet here sat a woman wearing Claire's one-of-a-kind pendant, smelling like Claire's signature perfume, making his 10-year-old son cry with recognition. "Miss Olivia?" Ethan said as passengers began gathering their belongings. "Do you ever dream about a little boy, like a really little boy with dark hair?" Olivia's breath caught audibly. "How did you?" She stared at him with wide eyes. Yes. I dream about a baby sometimes. Dark hair, blue eyes like..." She looked at Richard, then back at Ethan. "Like both of you have." "What happens in the dreams?" Richard asked, his voice barely steady. "I'm holding him, singing to him. There's this lullaby that I can never remember when I wake up. But in the dream, I know all the words." Tears had begun to gather in her eyes. "I always assumed it was just my mind trying to fill in the blanks, creating false memories to replace the ones I lost." Richard's heart nearly stopped. "Brahms' lullaby," he whispered. "In German. You used to sing it to Ethan when he was a baby." "I don't speak German," Olivia said automatically, then paused. "At least, I don't think I do." "Guten Abend, gut Nacht," Richard said softly, without thinking. Olivia continued. "Mit Rosen bedacht, mit Nägeln besteckt." She clapped her hand over her mouth, staring at him in shock. "I don't understand. How did I know those words?" Ethan had begun crying again, but these weren't tears of confusion. They were tears of hope mixed with a 10-year-old's overwhelming need for his mother. "Dad, it's her. I know it's her. She remembers the song." "Ethan, sweetheart, we can't jump to conclusions. But the necklace, Dad, and the perfume, and the song, and she looks like Mommy would look if she was older." Ethan's voice was rising, drawing concerned looks from other passengers. "Why won't you believe it?" Richard knelt down to his son's eye level, his hands gentle on the boy's shoulders. "Because I need to be sure, buddy. Because if we're wrong..." He couldn't finish the sentence. If they were wrong, if this was some cruel coincidence or elaborate scam, it would destroy them both. But as he looked into Olivia's eyes, really looked, he saw something that made his breath catch. There, beneath the confusion and fear, was a spark of something achingly familiar. The way she tilted her head when she was thinking. The way she bit her lower lip when she was uncertain. Small things, subtle things, but they were Claire's gestures down to the finest detail. "I need to ask you something," Richard said, standing slowly. "And I need you to think very carefully before you answer." Olivia nodded, though her hands were trembling. 8 years ago, before the accident, do you remember anything? Anything at all? A husband? A child? A life that might have been... Interrupted. The question hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Olivia closed her eyes, pressing her fingers to her temples, as if trying to squeeze memories from unwilling corners of her mind. "Sometimes," she whispered finally, "I have dreams where I'm not alone. There's a man with kind eyes and strong hands, and a baby that needs me, and I wake up feeling like I'm supposed to be somewhere else, with someone else." She opened her eyes and looked directly at Richard. "I wake up feeling homesick for a home I can't remember." The airport around them had emptied, but none of them seemed to notice. They were trapped in a bubble of possibility and pain, orbiting around a truth too enormous to fully comprehend. "Olivia," Richard said carefully, "I'd like you to come with us, to our hotel. I have some things I'd like to show you. Photos, videos, things that might help you remember. I can't. I have a return flight tomorrow morning and my supervisor..." "I own the airline," Richard said quietly. "I can handle your supervisor." She stared at him, then at Ethan, who was watching her with such desperate hope that it broke her heart. "You really think I might be your wife? Your mother?" The words came out in a whisper, as if speaking them too loudly might make them dissolve. "I think," Richard said, choosing his words with the care of a man handling explosives, "that there are too many coincidences here to ignore, and I think that little boy deserves to know for certain." Olivia looked down at Ethan, who had taken her hand in his small one. His fingers traced the lines of her palm with the unconscious familiarity of a child who had done this exact thing before, in another life, when the world made sense. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll come with you," as they walked through the terminal together, Richard carrying both their bags, Ethan holding Olivia's hand with fierce protectiveness. None of them noticed the woman watching from behind a pillar near the gate. Veronica Hale had followed them to Seattle on a hunch, and what she'd witnessed made her blood run cold. Claire was alive, and if her memories returned, everything Veronica had worked for, everything she'd done to claim her rightful place in Richard's life, would be destroyed. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd hoped never to use again. "It's me," she said when the call connected. "We have a problem." Veronica Hale sat in the back of her black Mercedes, her manicured fingers drumming against the leather seat as she watched the entrance to the Four Seasons Seattle. Through the tinted windows, she'd observed Richard, Ethan, and the woman. Claire, her mind corrected with vicious certainty, disappear into the hotel lobby an hour ago. The same woman she'd paid handsomely to have eliminated 8 years earlier. The burner phone in her lap buzzed with an incoming text. "Package delivered as requested. No survivors confirmed." The message was 8 years old, but she'd kept it as a reminder of what she was capable of when necessity demanded action. "Marcus," she said to the man seated across from her, his scarred hands folded in his lap like a patient predator. "I need you to understand something very clearly. The woman who just walked into that hotel should have been dead 8 years ago. The fact that she's not represents a complication that needs immediate attention." Marcus Vega had worked for the Hale family for over a decade, handling the kind of problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels. His loyalty was absolute, his methods efficient, and his questions non-existent. "What kind of attention are we talking about, Miss Hale?" Veronica's perfectly applied lipstick couldn't hide the cruel twist of her smile. "The permanent kind. But first, I need to know exactly how permanent her memories might become. Have someone watch them, report back everything, every conversation, every reaction, every moment of recognition." She paused, her green eyes hardening. "And Marcus, make sure she understands that some people aren't meant to come back from the dead." As the Mercedes pulled away from the hotel, Veronica closed her eyes and allowed herself to remember the night that had started it all. She'd been 26 then, already running the financial side of Hale Industries while Richard focused on expansion. She'd loved him since they were teenagers, a love that had curdled into obsession when he'd brought Claire home for Christmas dinner 15 years ago, Claire Martinez. With her easy laugh and genuine warmth, had captured Richard's heart within months. Veronica had watched from the sidelines as her brother, the only man she'd ever wanted, fell completely under the spell of a woman who couldn't possibly understand him the way she did. After all, who knew Richard's dreams, his fears, his ambitions better than the sister who'd stood by him through their parents' bitter divorce and their father's eventual death? The wedding had been torture, watching Richard's face as Claire walked down the aisle. Seeing him promise forever to someone else had felt like dying slowly, but Veronica had smiled and played the supportive sister, biding her time, telling herself that marriages failed, that Richard would eventually see what was right in front of him. Then, Ethan had been born, and Veronica had realized with crystalline clarity that Claire wasn't just an obstacle. She was a threat to everything Veronica had planned. Richard's devotion to his wife and son had been absolute, unshakable. He'd stopped noticing anyone else existed, including the sister who'd sacrificed her own happiness for his success. The plan had taken months to arrange. A pilot with gambling debts, a carefully orchestrated mechanical failure, a flight path that would ensure no bodies would ever be recovered from the deep Pacific waters. It should have been perfect, clean, untraceable. Except Claire had survived. Now, 8 years later, Veronica was the unofficial second-in-command of Hale Industries. She'd been there for Richard through his darkest moments, helping him navigate single parenthood, gradually making herself indispensable She'd even managed to convince herself that what she felt wasn't obsession but love. Pure, devoted love that her brother was too grief-stricken to recognize. Until today, her phone buzzed with an update from Marcus. They're in the penthouse suite. Room service ordered for 3. The woman appears distressed but not leaving. Veronica's jaw clenched. She needed to act quickly. Before Claire's memories returned fully, the woman had always been dangerously perceptive. And if she remembered the strange phone calls before the flight, the way the pilot had seemed nervous, the subtle mechanical issues that had plagued the plane in its final weeks. Change of plans, she typed back. I want rumors started immediately. Hotel staff, airline employees, anyone who will listen. The woman is a gold digger, a con artist who's done her research and is targeting a grieving widower. Make it convincing. But rumors wouldn't be enough. Veronica pulled up another contact in her phone. Dr. Sarah Chen, a psychiatrist who owed the Hale family several favors. If Claire was going to recover her memories, Veronica needed someone she trusted to monitor the process. Someone who could intervene if things went too far. Meanwhile, in the penthouse suite 40 floors above, Richard was spreading photo albums across the coffee table with hands that shook. Despite his efforts to remain calm, Olivia sat on the opposite end of the couch. Ethan pressed close to her side with the unconscious trust of a child following his instincts. This was our wedding day, Richard said, opening the first album. The photo showed him in a classic black tuxedo beside a radiant bride in flowing white silk. Claire's dark hair was swept up in an elaborate chignon, the emerald pendant glinting at her throat as she gazed adoringly at her new husband. Olivia studied the image intently, her free hand rising unconsciously to touch her own necklace. She's beautiful, she whispered. And she looks so happy. You look happy, Ethan corrected gently. That's you, Mom. I know it is. Ethan, sweetheart, we can't be certain. But look at her hands, Dad. Ethan pointed to the photo. See that little scar on her knuckle? The one she got when she was cooking and the knife slipped. He reached for Olivia's left hand, turning it palm up. There, on the knuckle of her ring finger, was a thin white scar, barely visible, unless you knew to look for it. The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Richard stared at the scar, a tiny imperfection he'd kissed 1,000 times, worried over when it was fresh, barely noticed in the years since. It was such a small thing, meaningless to anyone else, but to him it was as distinctive as a fingerprint. How? Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. How is this possible? Richard turned the page, revealing photos from their honeymoon in Tuscany. Claire laughing as she fed him gelato. Claire asleep in a field of sunflowers. Claire dancing in their hotel room wearing nothing but his dress shirt and that emerald pendant. With each image, Olivia's breathing grew more labored. Her free hand pressed against her chest, as if her heart were trying to escape. I remember this dress, she said suddenly, pointing to a photo of Claire in a flowing yellow sundress. Not wearing it, but I remember loving it, feeling beautiful in it. She looked up at Richard with eyes bright with unshed tears. How can I remember loving a dress I've never seen before? Before Richard could answer, Olivia doubled over with a sharp gasp, her face contorting in pain. My head, she managed between ragged breaths. It feels like something's trying to break through, but there's this wall, this fog. Richard moved to her side instantly, his arm around her shoulders. Should I call a doctor? No doctors. The words came out with surprising vehemence. I've had enough doctors poking around in my brain. She straightened slowly, wiping tears from her cheeks. I'm sorry. This happens sometimes when I try too hard to remember. It's like my mind is fighting itself. What none of them knew was that Olivia's headaches weren't natural. They were the result of carefully administered drugs that had been slipped into her food and drink for months by people she trusted. People who wanted to keep her memories buried forever. Ethan had been watching his father and Olivia with the intensity of a child, sensing that his world was about to change completely. Now he spoke with the simple wisdom that often came from young hearts. Maybe you don't need to remember everything all at once. Maybe you just need to feel it. He climbed onto the couch beside Olivia, and without asking permission, curled up against her side. The gesture was so natural, so automatic, that it took Richard's breath away. Ethan had always been cautious around strangers, but with Olivia, He moved with the easy familiarity of a child returning to his mother's arms. "This feels right," Olivia whispered, her arm tightening around the boy. "I don't understand it, but holding you feels like coming home." Outside, storm clouds were gathering over Seattle's skyline, and in a Mercedes circling the block below, Veronica Hale was making phone calls that would turn their reunion into a nightmare. The game had begun, and this time, she wouldn't leave Claire's death to chance. The next morning brought Seattle's typical gray drizzle, and with it, a peace that Richard hadn't felt in 8 years. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, watching Olivia and Ethan share breakfast at the small dining table. The scene was so achingly familiar. Claire had always been an early riser, making elaborate breakfasts that Ethan would pick at while chattering about his dreams. "Dad, look what Miss Olivia drew," Ethan called out, holding up a napkin covered in delicate pencil strokes. Richard approached the table and felt his heart skip. The drawing was unmistakably the view from their bedroom window in New York, the specific angle of Central Park that only someone who'd stood in that exact spot hundreds of times could capture with such precision. "I don't know why I drew that," Olivia said, staring at her own artwork with confusion. "It just felt important somehow, like a place I should remember." "It's the view from our bedroom," Richard said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. "You used to stand at that window every morning while you drank your coffee." Olivia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her cup. Black coffee with just a touch of cream, he noticed, exactly how Claire had always taken it. "Sometimes I dream about that window," she admitted, "about watching the sunrise and feeling complete, like I was exactly where I belonged." Ethan had finished his pancakes and was now rummaging through his backpack. "I brought something for you," he announced, pulling out a folded piece of construction paper. "I made this in art class last week, but now I think it was meant for you." The drawing showed 3 figures holding hands: a tall man, a woman with long dark hair, and a small boy. Above them, Ethan had carefully written "My family" in his 10-year-old scrawl. But what made Richard's throat tighten was the detail around the woman's neck, a tiny gold heart that Ethan had colored with a green crayon. "Even before I met you, I was drawing you," Ethan said with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children possessed. "Mrs. Patterson said it was because I missed my mom so much, but I think it was because I knew you were coming back." Olivia stared at the drawing, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "May I keep this?" "Of course it's yours anyway. You're my mom." "Ethan," Richard started to caution, but Olivia held up a gentle hand. "He's not wrong to hope," she said softly. "I feel it too, this connection, this sense of belonging. I just wish I could give you both the certainty you deserve." What she didn't tell them was that her headaches had been getting worse. Last night, she'd awakened from dreams so vivid they felt like memories. Holding a newborn baby, dancing in a kitchen while rain drummed against the windows, lying in a hospital bed feeling overwhelmed with love as she watched Richard cradle their son for the first time. But this morning, along with the coffee that room service had delivered, she'd felt that familiar fog descending again. The sharp edges of the dreams had blurred, and the headaches had returned with a vengeance. It was as if something was actively fighting against her attempts to remember. Downstairs in the hotel kitchen, Marcus Vega finished washing his hands and slipped out through the service entrance. The small vial of powder in his pocket was nearly empty now. He'd been adding it to the woman's food and drinks for 3 days. Following Dr. Chen's specific instructions about dosage and timing, the drug was designed to prevent the formation of new neural pathways while gradually eroding existing ones. Essentially, it kept the brain in a state of controlled confusion, making memory recovery nearly impossible. Veronica had been thorough in her preparations. If Claire couldn't be eliminated immediately, then she could be neutralized through pharmaceutical means while more permanent solutions were arranged. Back in the penthouse, Richard was sharing stories about Ethan's early years, hoping to trigger more memories. "You were so worried about everything when he was born," he said, pulling out his phone to show her videos. "You read every parenting book ever written and still called the pediatrician twice a week." The video showed Claire, unmistakably Claire, despite the minor differences in her face now, cradling a 6-month-old Ethan while singing softly in German as the lullaby filled the room. Olivia's eyes widened with recognition. "I know that song," she whispered, then began to hum along without conscious thought. Her voice matched Claire's perfectly, down to the slight tremor on the high notes that had always made Richard's heart ache with tenderness. Morgen früh, wenn Gott will wirst du wieder geweckt, she sang, the words flowing as naturally as breathing. Ethan was off the couch in an instant, throwing his arms around her neck. You remember the song. But even as she held him, Olivia felt the fog pressing in again, making the German words slip away like water through her fingers. The headache that had been building all morning suddenly spiked, causing her to gasp in pain. I'm sorry, she managed, pressing her palms against her temples. I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself even as I find them. Richard knelt beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. We don't have to do this all at once. Maybe we should take a break, get some fresh air. No, the word came out more forcefully than she'd intended. I need to know. I need to understand what happened to me, why I can't remember my own life. She looked up at him with desperate eyes. Richard, what if I never get it all back? What if I'm just fragments forever? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Sir, there are reporters in the lobby asking about you and a woman claiming to be your deceased wife. Should I call security? Richard's blood chilled. How did reporters find out about this? Find out about what? Olivia asked, seeing his expression change. Stay here with Ethan, Richard said, already moving toward the door. I'll handle this. But as the elevator descended, Richard's mind raced with ugly possibilities. Only a handful of people knew about Olivia's presence in Seattle. His assistant, the hotel staff who'd seen them together, and Veronica. The lobby was chaos. At least 6 reporters with cameras and microphones had surrounded the concierge desk, demanding information about the Richard Hale mystery woman. Richard could hear fragments of their questions as he approached. Is it true she's claiming to be your dead wife? How long have you been hiding her? What's her real name? Mr. Hale? A blonde reporter thrust a microphone toward him. Can you confirm that you're harboring a woman who's impersonating your deceased wife? Our sources say she's a known con artist who's been researching your family for months. The words hit Richard like physical blows. Con artist. Impersonating. The accusations were so specific, so detailed, that they could only have come from someone with inside knowledge of the situation. No comment, he said firmly, pushing through the crowd toward the elevator. What about the pendant, Mr. Hale? Another reporter called out. How do you explain her possession of what was supposedly a unique piece of jewelry? Richard froze. The pendant wasn't public knowledge. He'd never mentioned it to the media, never described it in any interview about Claire's death. The only people who knew its significance were family members, and the elevator doors closed just as his phone rang. Veronica's name appeared on the screen. Hello, brother. Her voice was silk over steel. I hear you've had an interesting few days. What did you do, Veronica? I protected our family's reputation from a very clever opportunist, Richard. I've been doing some digging into your new friend. Olivia Grant has a history of inserting herself into wealthy families' lives. There are police reports from Phoenix, complaints from other grieving widowers. You're lying. Am I? Check your email. I've sent you everything my investigator found. Her voice softened with false concern. I know how much you want Claire to be alive, but this woman is preying on your grief. She's studied our family, learned Claire's mannerisms, probably had plastic surgery to enhance the resemblance. The elevator climbed toward the penthouse, and with each floor, Richard felt his world cracking apart. Part of him knew Veronica was manipulating him, but another part, the part that had been protecting his heart for 8 years, whispered that it was too good to be true. Dead wives didn't return from the grave wearing jewelry that should have been at the bottom of the ocean. When he reached the suite, he found Olivia collapsed on the bathroom floor, Ethan kneeling beside her in tears. She just fell down, Dad. She was holding her head and crying, and then she just fell down. Richard lifted Olivia carefully, noting how light she felt, how fragile. Her skin was pale and clammy, her breathing shallow. Call 911, he told Ethan. But even as he said it, Olivia's eyes fluttered open. No hospitals, she whispered. Please, I need to rest, as he carried her to the bed. Richard's phone chimed with Veronica's promised email. The subject line read, The Truth About Olivia Grant. His finger hovered over the message as Olivia curled into the pillows, looking lost and broken. In her unconscious state, She'd reverted to a sleeping position he recognized, curled on her left side, one hand tucked under her cheek, the other clutching the emerald pendant. It was exactly how Claire had always slept, but doubts were dangerous things, and Veronica knew exactly how to plant them in the most fertile ground of all, a heart that had been broken once and couldn't survive being shattered again. Richard stared at his laptop screen for the third time, reading Veronica's email with growing unease. The documents she'd sent painted a disturbing picture. Olivia Grant had allegedly approached 3 other wealthy widowers in the past 5 years, each time claiming fragmented memories that conveniently aligned with their deceased wives' histories. There were police reports, complaints filed by suspicious family members, even hospital records showing her treatment for psychological instability. But something felt wrong about it all. The timing was too convenient, the evidence too neat, and the photograph included in the file, supposedly showing Olivia at a charity gala in Phoenix 2 years ago, looked subtly manipulated around the edges, as if someone had worked very hard to make it appear authentic. "Dad?" Ethan appeared in the doorway of the sweet study, his face etched with worry. "Is Mom going to be okay?" The innocent question hit Richard like a punch to the gut. "She's not..." He stopped himself, seeing the hope in his son's eyes. "Olivia is resting. The doctor said she needs to avoid stress for a few days." The hotel physician had arrived within an hour of Olivia's collapse, diagnosing severe exhaustion and recommending complete rest. What he hadn't mentioned, because he hadn't been looking for it, were the traces of rohypnol-like compounds that were slowly building up in her system, courtesy of Marcus Vega's careful ministrations. "I know she's Mom," Ethan said with 10-year-old stubbornness. "I can feel it in my heart, can't you?" Richard closed the laptop, unable to look at those damning documents while his son's faith shone so brightly. "Come here, buddy." Ethan climbed into his father's lap, something he rarely did anymore, preferring to project the independence of an almost teenager. But this situation had stripped away his pretenses, leaving him raw and desperate. "I've been thinking about what Aunt Veronica said on the phone," Ethan said quietly. "About Olivia being a fake person who's trying to trick us." Richard's blood chilled. He hadn't realized Ethan had overheard that conversation. "What do you think about that?" "I think Aunt Veronica is scared." "Scared of what?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, playing with his father's watch the way he always did when he was working through something complicated. "Remember when Tommy Morrison's dad got a new girlfriend, and Tommy was really mean to her at first because he thought she was trying to replace his mom?" "I remember. But Tommy was being mean because he was scared his dad would love the girlfriend more than him. Maybe Aunt Veronica is scared you'll love Mom more than her." The simplicity of the observation struck Richard with uncomfortable clarity. Veronica had always been possessive of their relationship. Even as children, their parents' divorce had thrown them together as allies, and their father's death had only strengthened that bond. But lately, especially since Claire's death, Veronica's protective instincts had taken on an almost obsessive quality. "Ethan, that's a very grown-up thought." "I'm almost 11, Ethan replied with dignity, "and I pay attention to things." He looked up at his father with serious blue eyes. "Dad, do you believe she's Mom?" The question Richard had been avoiding confronting directly hung between them like a bridge he was afraid to cross. His heart said yes with every beat, but his mind cataloged all the reasons it was impossible. Dangerous, potentially devastating. "I want to believe it," he said finally. "More than I've ever wanted anything." "Then why don't you?" Before Richard could answer, a soft knock interrupted them. Olivia stood in the doorway wearing one of his old Columbia sweatshirts that she'd found in the closet. Another unconscious echo of Claire, who had always stolen his clothes when she was feeling vulnerable. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice still shaky from her earlier collapse. "But I heard voices and She trailed off, looking lost. "You don't like being alone," Richard said without thinking. "You never did. Even before Ethan was born. You'd follow me around the apartment rather than sit in a room by yourself." Olivia's eyes widened. "How did you know that?" "I never told you." "Because Claire was the same way." He stood up, setting Ethan gently aside. "She said being alone made her feel like she was disappearing." "That's exactly how it feels," Olivia whispered, wrapping her arms around herself. "Like if no one can see me, I might just fade away completely." The admission was so purely Claire, that Richard felt his carefully constructed doubts begin to crumble. The woman in Veronica's files might have been able to research facts, dates, even mannerisms, but she couldn't have known about Claire's private fears, the vulnerabilities she'd shared only with him in their most intimate moments. "There's something I need to show you," he said, making a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "Something I've never shown anyone, not even Ethan." He led them to the master bedroom and pulled out his phone, scrolling to a video file he'd protected with multiple passwords. "This was from our last anniversary, 3 weeks before the accident. I found it on our camera after." The video began playing, showing Claire in their kitchen, unaware she was being filmed. She was making coffee and humming, not the German lullaby, but something wordless and sweet. As they watched, she turned toward the camera with a surprised laugh. "Richard Hale, are you recording me with bedhead and no makeup?" "You're beautiful," his voice said from the recording. "Dance with me." "There's no music. Since when has that stopped us?" What followed was pure magic. Claire moving into Richard's arms as he began singing, "The Way You Look Tonight," in a voice slightly off-key but full of love. They swayed together in their kitchen, completely absorbed in each other, her head nestled perfectly in the curve of his shoulder. Olivia watched with tears streaming down her face, but as the video continued, something extraordinary happened. Her body began moving in subtle mimicry of Claire's movements, her head tilting at the same angle, her feet shifting in the same pattern. When Video Claire laughed at Richard missing a note, Olivia laughed too. The exact same sound, down to the little snort that had always embarrassed Claire. "I remember this," Olivia breathed as the video ended, not watching it, but being in it. "I remember how your shirt felt under my cheek, how you always sang that song when you wanted to make me laugh." She looked up at him with wonder and terror. "Richard, I remember being happy. I remember loving you so much it scared me." Ethan had been watching both adults with the intensity of a scientist observing a crucial experiment. "Dad," he said quietly. Her face changed while she was watching. She looked exactly like Mom when Mom was really, really happy. Richard was about to respond when his phone buzzed with a text from hotel security. "Sir, we have a situation in the parking garage. 3 men were apprehended attempting to access your vehicle. They had photos of the woman staying with you." The message sent ice through Richard's veins. "We need to leave now." "Leave? Why?" Olivia asked. But Richard was already moving, grabbing clothes and throwing them into a suitcase. "Because someone wants to hurt you, and I'm not going to let that happen again." The words came out with fierce protectiveness that surprised them all. In that moment, Richard realized he'd made his choice. Whatever the truth about Olivia's identity, whatever Veronica's evidence suggested, he wasn't going to lose this woman twice. Again. Olivia caught the word immediately. Richard paused in his packing, meeting her eyes across the room. "I lost Claire because I wasn't there to protect her. I won't make that mistake again," as they prepared to leave Seattle. None of them noticed the figure watching from the hotel across the street, or the way Veronica Hale's hands trembled with rage as she dialed Marcus Vega's number. "They're running," she said when he answered. "Change of plans. If we can't separate them, we'll have to eliminate the problem at its source. Both of them." Veronica's smile was cold enough to freeze blood. All 3 of them. Make it look like an accident. A family tragedy. The grieving widower who couldn't accept his wife's death, finally joining her in whatever delusion he'd created. The war was no longer silent. It was about to become very, very loud. The private jet climbed through turbulent skies toward New York, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the tempest brewing in Richard's mind. He'd spent the last hour on encrypted calls with his head of security, learning details that made his blood run cold. The men in the parking garage hadn't been random criminals. They were professionals, the kind who specialized in making people disappear without a trace. Across the narrow aisle, Olivia sat with Ethan curled against her side, both of them finally sleeping after the chaos of their hasty departure from Seattle. In sleep, her face had relaxed into expressions he remembered so clearly. It was like looking back through time, the way her lips curved slightly upward, even in unconsciousness, the way her hand instinctively moved to shield Ethan when turbulence shook the plane. These weren't learned behaviors. They were muscle memory, love encoded in her very cells. His phone buzzed with a message from James Crawford, his security chief. Background check on Veronica's evidence complete. The police reports are fabricated. The hospital records are fake. Someone spent significant money creating a false identity trail for Olivia Grant that only goes back exactly 8 years. Richard's hands tightened on the phone. He'd suspected as much, but seeing it confirmed filled him with a rage so pure it was almost blinding. Someone had tried to convince him that the woman sleeping 10 feet away, the woman who hummed Claire's favorite songs, who moved with Claire's exact grace, who made Ethan light up like Christmas morning, was a fraud. Another message appeared. More concerning news. Flight records show Veronica was on a plane to Seattle the day before you arrived. She knew about Olivia before you told anyone. The implications hit Richard like a sledgehammer. Veronica hadn't just manufactured evidence against Olivia. She'd been tracking her, following her, which meant his phone rang, and Veronica's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, Richard considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told him this conversation couldn't wait. "Hello, Veronica. Richard. Thank God you're answering. I've been trying to reach you for hours." Her voice carried the perfect note of sisterly concern, but now he could hear the manipulation underneath it. "I heard about the incident at the hotel. Are you and Ethan safe?" "We're fine. No thanks to your hired thugs." There was a pause. Just a fraction of a second too long. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the act, Veronica. I know you've been having Olivia followed. I know you fabricated those police reports and hospital records. The question is why?" Another pause. And when she spoke again, the mask had slipped slightly. "Because I'm trying to protect you from making the biggest mistake of your life. That woman is not Claire, Richard. Claire is dead. I saw the crash reports myself. I watched you grieve. You watched me grieve because you killed her." The words hung in the air, like a bomb waiting to explode. Richard hadn't fully realized he was going to say them until they left his mouth. But once spoken, he knew with crystalline certainty that they were true. That's a horrible thing to say." Veronica's voice was shaking now, but whether from genuine hurt or fear, Richard couldn't tell. "I loved Claire like a sister. Her death devastated our entire family. Did it? Or did it give you exactly what you'd always wanted? Me, dependent on you, grateful for your support, too broken to notice anyone else. Richard, I've been thinking about that night before Claire's flight. You insisted on going over the quarterly reports, keeping me at the office until almost midnight. Claire called 3 times asking when I'd be home, and you kept finding more urgent matters to discuss. I was doing my job. You were making sure I wasn't there to drive her to the airport, making sure she had to take that specific flight." Richard's voice was getting louder. And across the aisle, Olivia stirred in her sleep. He forced himself to speak more quietly, but the fury remained. "How long have you been in love with me, Veronica? Since we were teenagers. Since Dad died and you convinced yourself we were meant to be together." The silence stretched so long, he thought the call had dropped. When Veronica finally spoke, her voice was completely different. Cold, calculating, stripped of all pretense. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed for you. What I've done to build the life you have now. Everything you are, everything you own, exists because I made it possible. By murdering my wife. By removing an obstacle that was keeping you from reaching your full potential." The words were delivered with chilling matter-of-factness. "Claire was sweet, Richard, but she was small-minded. She wanted you to be content with one hotel, one city, a quiet little life-playing house. I saw what you could become, what we could build together. We, Veronica, were siblings. Whatever sick fantasy you've been nurturing. Adoptive siblings," she snapped. "Not blood relations, and age doesn't matter when 2 people are meant for each other. I've been waiting for you to see it, to understand that everything I've done has been for us." Richard felt physically ill, including trying to have Olivia killed, including protecting you from a woman who's clearly unhinged enough to believe her own lies. "Did you really think I'd let some delusional con artist destroy everything we've built? She's not a con artist. She's Claire. And deep down, you know it, don't you? That's why you're so desperate to get rid of her." This time the silence was different, charged with a kind of trapped animal desperation. When Veronica spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Even if she is Claire, and I'm not saying she is, it doesn't matter. She doesn't remember being your wife. She doesn't remember loving you. For all intents and purposes, that woman died 8 years ago. Why can't you let her stay dead? Because I love her. Because Ethan needs his mother. Because what you did was murder. And I won't let you get away with it. You have no proof. I have Olivia. Once her memory fully returns. Her memory isn't returning, Richard. I've made sure of that. The admission slipped out before Veronica could stop it, and Richard felt the world tilt beneath him. What did you do? Nothing permanent, just preventative measures. As long as she takes her medication regularly, her mind will remain stable. No traumatic memory flashbacks. No psychological breaks. I was trying to help her. You've been drugging her. I've been treating her. There's a difference. Richard looked across at Olivia, remembering her headaches, her confusion, the way memories seemed to slip through her fingers just as she grasped them. You sick, twisted. I'm the woman who's loved you longer than anyone else alive, who stood by you through everything, who built an empire at your side while your precious Claire played dress-up in her little boutique. Veronica's voice was rising, years of suppressed emotion pouring out. I'm the one who deserves to be Mrs. Richard Hale, not some amnesia victim who can't even remember your name. The line went dead, leaving Richard staring at his phone in horror. Across the aisle, Olivia's eyes opened, clear and alert despite having appeared to be sleeping. I heard everything, she said quietly. Your sister, she really did try to kill me. Richard moved to kneel beside her seat, taking her hands in his. Olivia, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. Richard. Her voice stopped him mid-apology. My name isn't Olivia. He stared at her, hardly daring to hope. I remember now. Pieces anyway, the fog is lifting. She touched his face with trembling fingers. My name is Claire Elizabeth Martinez Hale. I'm your wife. I'm Ethan's mother. Tears spilled over as she smiled. The first genuine smile he'd seen from her. And I love you. I've always loved you, even when I couldn't remember why. Ethan stirred against her side, his eyes opening sleepily. Mom, he whispered, as if he'd been waiting his whole life to say that word to her. Yes, baby, Claire whispered back. I'm here. I'm finally here. But even as the family embraced 30,000 feet above the ground, Richard knew their reunion was far from safe. Veronica's desperation had been laid bare, and desperate people were capable of anything. The war was about to reach its final, most dangerous phase. The penthouse in Manhattan felt like a fortress under siege. Richard had tripled security, installed additional cameras, and brought in James Crawford's most trusted operatives. But none of it eased the knot of dread in his stomach. Veronica had gone silent since their confrontation on the plane. No calls, no texts, no appearances at the Hale Industries offices. That silence was more terrifying than any threat she could have made. Claire sat at the kitchen island, slowly sipping coffee while staring out at Central Park. The view that had once been automatic background was now helping unlock memories, each familiar sight triggering cascades of recollection. She remembered Christmas mornings at this window, watching Ethan's face light up at the snow. She remembered Richard bringing her breakfast in bed. The newspaper spread between them as they planned their days. She remembered feeling safe here, protected, loved. The headaches are almost gone, she said, as Richard joined her. Whatever she was giving me, it's finally working its way out of my system. How much do you remember now? Claire closed her eyes, taking inventory of the fragments that were slowly becoming a complete picture. Most of it, the wedding, Ethan's birth, the business trips we took together. I remember the night before. She paused, her hand moving unconsciously to her throat. Before the flight, you were late coming home from the office. Veronica kept me there with supposedly urgent reports. I should have known. You couldn't have known your own sister was capable of murder. Claire turned to face him, her brown eyes clear and fierce. But I remember other things too. The way she looked at you at family gatherings. The way she'd find excuses to touch your arm, stand too close. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it. From the living room came the sound of Ethan's laughter as he played video games. The normalcy of it almost surreal given the circumstances. Claire smiled at the sound. He's grown so much. I missed 3 birthdays, his first day of school, learning to ride a bike. You'll be there for everything else, Richard said firmly. I promise you that. Before Claire could respond, Richard's secure phone buzzed with an urgent message from Crawford. We have a problem. Ethan's school just called. He He never arrived this morning. The blood drained from Richard's face. "Ethan," he called out. But the living room had gone silent. Too silent. They raced into the room to find Ethan's game controller on the floor, the TV still playing, but no sign of the boy. The sliding door to the balcony stood open. Something Richard was certain had been closed and locked. Claire's scream pierced the air as she spotted the note on the coffee table. Written in Veronica's precise handwriting, "Rooftop of the Meridian Hotel, 1 hour, come alone, or the boy pays for your stupidity, and Richard, bring your dead wife. It's time she learned what happens to women who don't stay buried." "She has him," Claire whispered, her face white with terror. "Oh God, she has our baby." Richard was already on his phone, barking orders to Crawford. "I want every security camera between here and the Meridian analyzed. I want to know how she got in, how she got out, and what kind of support she has." "Richard, I'm coming with you," Claire said, but he shook his head. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. That's my son." The words exploded from her with a mother's fury. "I've already lost 8 years with him. I won't lose another second because you think I'm too fragile to fight for my own child." "Claire, you don't understand what Veronica is capable of." "I understand perfectly." Claire's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "I understand that she murdered me once already. I understand that she's been drugging me to keep me compliant. I understand that she's taken my child to hurt us both." She moved closer, her eyes blazing. "But what she doesn't understand is that I remember everything now, including things she doesn't know I witnessed." "What do you mean?" "The night before my flight, when you were at the office, Veronica came to the house. She didn't know I was upstairs listening when she made a phone call." Claire's hands clenched into fists as the memory crystallized. "She was talking to someone about flight plans, about making sure there would be no survivors," she said, and I quote, "make it look like engine failure. But I want that plane in pieces small enough that they'll never find bodies." Richard stared at her in shock. "You heard her planning it. Every word. I was going to tell you the next morning, but then," she gestured helplessly, "then I woke up in Arizona with no memory of who I was. We have to record this. Get it to the police. The police won't help us in time." "Ethan doesn't have time." Claire was already moving toward the bedroom. "But Veronica thinks I'm still the confused, helpless victim she's been manipulating. She's about to learn how wrong she is." 20 minutes later, they stood on the windswept rooftop of the Meridian Hotel, Manhattan's skyline stretching endlessly in all directions. Veronica waited near the edge, her designer coat whipping in the wind, one hand gripping Ethan's arm while the other held what looked like a small remote control. Ethan appeared unharmed but terrified, his young face streaked with tears. When he saw them, he tried to run, but Veronica's grip tightened. "Stay where you are," she called out, her voice carrying clearly across the empty rooftop. "Both of you. This ends here one way or another. Let him go." "Veronica," Richard said, stepping forward, "your fight is with me. My fight is with the ghost who refuses to stay dead." Veronica's composure was cracking, years of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. "Do you have any idea what I've endured? Watching you mourn her, listening to you talk about her like she was some saint. She was nothing, Richard, a shop girl with delusions of grandeur. She was my wife," Richard said calmly. "She was the mother of my child. She was everything you'll never be." The words hit their mark. Veronica's face contorted with rage, but Claire stepped forward before she could respond. "Hello, Veronica," she said, her voice carrying an odd note of satisfaction. "Miss me?" "You're not Claire," Veronica snarled, but uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "You're a damaged woman who's been brainwashed into believing I'm the woman who heard you planning my murder." Claire's words cut through Veronica's denial like a blade. "October 15th, 8 years ago. You came to our house while Richard was at the office. You used the phone in the kitchen, the red one by the window, and you called someone named Marcus about making my plane crash." Veronica's face went white. "That's impossible. You were upstairs. You were asleep. I was getting a glass of water. You were too busy gloating to notice me on the stairs." Claire took another step forward, and Richard noticed she was positioning herself to have a clear path to Ethan. "You told Marcus to make it look like engine failure, but to ensure no survivors, you said. And I'll never forget this. I want Richard broken enough to need me, but not so broken he follows her into the grave. Stop, Veronica whispered, but Claire continued relentlessly. You calculated my death like a business transaction. You planned to comfort my husband and raise my son as your own. But you made one crucial mistake, Veronica. What mistake? Claire smiled. And for the first time since the rooftop confrontation began, Richard saw his wife, not the confused Olivia, not the recovering amnesia victim, but Claire in all her fierce protective glory. You assumed I'd stay dead. The wind howled around them as the three adults faced off 40 stories above the city, with one little boy's life hanging in the balance and 8 years of lies finally coming into the light. The final game had begun. The wind on the rooftop carried the distant sounds of Manhattan traffic, but the silence between the 4 people on the Meridian Hotel's highest point was deafening. Veronica's grip on Ethan had tightened, her knuckles white against the remote control in her other hand, while Claire stood perfectly still, every muscle coiled like a spring ready to release. You think you're so clever, Veronica said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury, standing there reciting conversations you claim to have overheard 8 years ago. But even if you are Claire, and I'm not admitting anything, it doesn't matter. You have no proof. Actually, I do. Claire's voice was steady, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather instead of standing on the edge of life and death. You see, when I heard you on that phone call, I did what any smart woman would do. I recorded it. Veronica's face went chalk white. That's impossible. Is it? You forget. I was married to Richard for 5 years. I learned a few things about protecting myself in business. Claire pulled out her phone, her movements slow and deliberate. Voice-activated recording app. I turned it on the moment I heard you talking. Old habits from recording business meetings. You're bluffing. Claire's thumb hovered over the play button. Want to hear your own voice confessing to premeditated murder? I'm sure the FBI would find it fascinating, especially the part where you discussed payment arrangements with Marcus Vega. The name hit Veronica like a physical blow. Marcus was her most closely guarded secret, the man who'd handled her dirty work for over a decade. No one should have known that name except... That's right, Claire continued, reading Veronica's expression perfectly. I know about Marcus. I know about the other accidents over the years. The business rival who had that unfortunate boating incident. The auditor who died in that suspicious house fire. You've been cleaning up Richard's path to success for a long time, haven't you? All in the name of love. Everything I did was for him. The words exploded from Veronica with the force of years of suppressed emotion. Every obstacle I removed, every problem I solved. It was all so Richard could become everything he was meant to be, without his knowledge or consent, Richard said, his voice heavy with disgust. You turned me into an accessory to murder. You were weak. Veronica spun toward her brother, dragging Ethan with her. Too soft, too moral to do what was necessary. Someone had to make the hard choices, like murdering my wife, like removing the anchor that was dragging you down. Veronica's composure was completely shattered now, tears streaming down her face. Claire was going to make you soft, Richard. She wanted you to scale back the business, spend more time at home, be content with less. She would have destroyed everything we built together. We built. Claire's voice cut through Veronica's hysteria like ice. You mean everything Richard built while you manipulated from the shadows? Tell me, Veronica, when did your love for your brother become obsession? When did protecting him become possessing him? Veronica's laugh was bitter, broken. You want to know when? I'll tell you exactly when. It was Richard's 21st birthday. Dad had just died, and we were both grieving, both lost. Richard was crying, really crying, for the first time since we were children. And I held him, and for just one moment, he looked at me like I was the most important person in his world. Veronica, Richard said softly, understanding dawning in his voice. I was grieving. You were my sister, my family. I was 17 years old, and I'd never felt love like that before. The words poured out of her like blood from a wound. Every day after that, I waited for you to look at me that way again. I made myself indispensable to your business, your life, your success. I thought if I could just prove how perfect we were together. But then he met me, Claire said quietly. Then he met you. Veronica's voice was pure venom now, and suddenly nothing I did mattered. All my sacrifices, all my devotion, all the times I put your needs above everything else. None of it could compete with some random woman he met at a coffee shop. Ethan whimpered as Veronica's grip tightened, and Claire's maternal instincts overrode everything else. Veronica, please. He's just a little boy. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's the symbol of everything I lost. Veronica looked down at Ethan with wild eyes. Your child with Richard. The family I should have had. The life that was stolen from me. The life you were never meant to have, Claire said firmly. Richard is your brother, Veronica. What you're describing isn't love. It's obsession. It's sickness. Don't you dare psychoanalyze me. Then let me give you facts instead. Claire took a step closer, ignoring Richard's warning gesture. You've spent 15 years of your life obsessed with a man who will never love you the way you want. You've committed multiple murders, destroyed countless lives, and poisoned your own soul. And for what? Richard will never be yours. Veronica. Ever. He was mine first. The scream tore from Veronica's throat, raw and desperate. I loved him first. I knew him first. I was there when no one else was. And he loved you too, as his sister, the way normal siblings love each other. But you twisted that love into something sick and possessive. Claire's voice was relentless, each word designed to strip away Veronica's last defenses. You want to know the real tragedy, Veronica. If you'd just been his sister, really been his sister, you could have been part of our family. You could have been Aunt Veronica, loved and respected and included in everything. But you chose obsession instead. Veronica stared at her for a long moment, something breaking behind her eyes. It's too late for that now. It doesn't have to be. Let Ethan go. Turn yourself in. Get the help you need. Help? Veronica laughed bitterly. There's no help for what I am. There's no going back from the things I've done. She looked at the remote in her hand, then at the rooftop around them. But I can make sure you don't get your happy ending either. What is that thing? Richard demanded. Pointing at the device, Veronica smiled, and for the first time, it was genuine and terrifying. Insurance policy. There are explosives planted throughout this building, enough to bring the whole structure down. She held up the remote. Dead man's switch. If I let go, if my heart stops beating, if anything happens to me, we all go down together. Claire felt her world tilt. You're insane. I'm committed. There's a difference. Veronica looked at Richard with something that might have been love if it wasn't so twisted. I'd rather see you dead than see you happy with her. Veronica, there are hundreds of innocent people in this building. Collateral damage, just like all the others. She pulled Ethan closer to the edge of the rooftop. You have 30 seconds to decide. Richard, jump, and I'll let the boy go. Die with me. Prove your love was real, and I'll make sure Ethan survives to remember what devotion really looks like. You're out of your mind if you think... 20 seconds. Claire's mind raced, calculating distances, possibilities, odds. Veronica was standing 3 feet from the rooftop edge, holding Ethan with her left hand while the remote stayed firmly in her right. If Claire could reach them before Veronica could react. 15 seconds, Richard. Choose. Wait, Claire said, her voice suddenly calm. I have something else to tell you, Veronica. Something about that night. About the recording. 10 seconds. I lied. Claire's words stopped Veronica mid-countdown. There is no recording. I never heard you make that phone call. Veronica blinked. Confusion replacing certainty. What? But Marcus did tell me everything when he thought I was dying in that Arizona hospital, right before he tried to finish the job. And with those words, Claire launched herself across the rooftop. Everything she had learned about her family's strength. Her own fierce protective instincts, and 8 years of stolen time driving her forward toward her son. The final confrontation had begun. Time slowed to a crawl as Claire launched herself across the rooftop. Veronica's eyes widened in shock, her grip on both Ethan and the remote momentarily loosening as she tried to process this unexpected attack. Claire's shoulder connected with Veronica's midsection, sending them both sprawling across the concrete surface, but not before Veronica's fingers spasmed on the dead man's switch. Nothing happened. The remote was a fake, Richard said, appearing beside them as Claire rolled away from Veronica, pulling Ethan to safety. My security team found the real explosives 3 hours ago. We've been tracking your every move since you took our son." Veronica lay on her back, staring up at the gray sky in disbelief. "That's impossible. Marcus would never." "Marcus is in federal custody," Richard continued, kneeling beside his sister with something that might have been pity in his eyes. "He was arrested this morning on charges of conspiracy to commit murder, among other things. Turns out he kept very detailed records of all your business arrangements over the years. Insurance, he called it. He wouldn't betray me. He's worked for our family He worked for money, Veronica. And when the FBI offered him immunity in exchange for testimony, he didn't hesitate." Richard's voice was sad but firm. "It's over." Claire held Ethan close, both of them trembling with adrenaline and relief. "Are you hurt, baby? Did she hurt you?" "I'm okay, Mom," Ethan whispered, the word coming so naturally it brought tears to Claire's eyes. "I knew you'd save me. I knew you wouldn't let anything bad happen." Across the rooftop, Veronica had begun to laugh, a broken, hollow sound that sent chills down Claire's spine. "You think this is over? You think arresting me solves everything?" She struggled to sit up, her designer coat torn and dirty. "Richard, you have no idea how many people I've had killed to protect you. How many crimes have been committed in your name? When this all comes out, and it will come out, your precious empire will crumble. Let it," Richard said without hesitation. "Some things are more important than business. You say that now, but when the investigations start, when the media descends, when everything we built together turns to ash, then we'll build something new." Claire stood up, still holding Ethan's hand. "Something clean, something honest." Veronica's laughter cut off abruptly. "You naive little fool. You have no idea what you're talking about. The things I've done, the blood on my hands, it's all connected to Richard, to his success, his reputation, his future. Destroying me destroys him too." "Maybe," Richard acknowledged, "but I'd rather lose everything and have my family back than keep an empire built on murder and lies." The sound of helicopters approaching cut through their conversation. Within minutes, the rooftop was swarming with FBI agents, led by a sharp-eyed woman in a bulletproof vest who introduced herself as Agent Sarah Martinez. "Mrs. Hale," she said to Claire, "we're going to need extensive statements from both you and your husband. What you've uncovered here goes far beyond a single murder attempt." As Veronica was read her rights and led away in handcuffs, she turned back one last time. "This isn't finished, Richard. Even from prison, the truth will come out. Everything I did for you, everything I sacrificed." "You didn't sacrifice anything for me," Richard said quietly. "You sacrificed everything because you couldn't accept that I would never love you the way you wanted. There's a difference." Veronica's face crumpled, and for a moment, she looked like the scared 17-year-old girl who had clung to her brother after their father's death. "I loved you so much," she whispered. "I just wanted you to love me back. I did love you back," Richard replied, his voice heavy with sorrow. "I loved you as my sister, as my family. If you'd let that be enough, we could have had a lifetime of that love, but you chose to destroy it instead." As the FBI led Veronica away, Claire felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The woman who had tried to kill her, who had stolen 8 years of her life, who had just threatened her child, was also Richard's sister, the last connection to his original family. "Are you okay?" she asked him quietly, as they watched the helicopter disappear into the distance. "I keep thinking about when we were kids," Richard said. "She was just this lost little girl who wanted to feel important, wanted to feel loved. Somewhere along the way, that need twisted into something monstrous. Mental illness doesn't excuse what she did," Claire said firmly. "She made choices. Richard, every step of the way, she chose violence and manipulation over getting help. I know. I should have seen it. Should have recognized how unhealthy her attachment had become." Claire took his hand, squeezing gently. "You're not responsible for her choices. You're only responsible for yours, and you chose to fight for our family, to believe in us even when it seemed impossible." Over the next several hours, they gave statements to the FBI, met with lawyers, and began the complicated process of untangling 8 years of lies. The media circus was already beginning. News vans gathering outside the building, reporters calling for statements about the miracle return of Richard Hale's dead wife. "We're going to need a place to hide out for a while," Richard said as they finally left the FBI field office. "Somewhere Ethan can just be a normal kid while we figure out how to move forward." "I have an idea," Claire said. "Remember that little house we looked at in Connecticut? The one with the big yard and the tire swing?" Richard smiled. The first genuine smile she'd seen from him since this nightmare began. "You mean the one you fell in love with, but we never bought because it was too small for entertaining? That's the one. I think it's time we reevaluated our priorities, don't you?" 3 weeks later, they were sitting on the porch of that exact house, watching Ethan play in the yard with a neighbor's dog. The FBI investigation was ongoing, but the immediate charges against Veronica were solid: murder conspiracy, kidnapping, fraud. She would be in prison for the rest of her life. Richard's business empire was indeed crumbling. Just as Veronica had predicted, the revelations about the crimes committed in his name had triggered investigations, lawsuits, and a media-feeding frenzy that would take years to fully resolve. But sitting here, watching his son laugh and his wife, his actual, living, breathing wife, work in the garden they'd planted together, Richard found he didn't care. "Any regrets?" Claire asked, settling beside him on the porch swing. "About giving up the business, about the money we're going to lose, about having to start over from scratch." Richard pulled her close, inhaling the scent of vanilla and jasmine that had haunted his dreams for 8 years. Not a single one. Even when Ethan needs college tuition and we're eating ramen noodles. Especially then. He kissed the top of her head. "Besides, I hear there's a small hotel for sale in Vermont. Nothing fancy, just a country inn that needs some work. Interested in a new adventure, Mrs. Hale?" Claire looked up at him with those warm brown eyes that had first stolen his heart 15 years ago. "With you, always." As the sun set over their new life, painting the Connecticut sky in shades of gold and pink, none of them noticed the figure watching from the woods beyond their property line, or the way the setting sun glinted off the telephoto lens of an expensive camera. Some stories end happily ever after. Others simply pause between chapters, gathering strength for whatever comes next. 6 months later, the small chapel in Woodstock, Vermont, was nothing like the grand cathedral where Richard and Claire had first exchanged vows 15 years earlier. This time, white roses replaced elaborate orchid arrangements, and 50 close friends took the place of 300 business associates and society figures. But as Claire walked down the simple aisle in a flowing cream dress, her hand tucked into Ethan's arm, her son insisting on the honor of giving his mother away, Richard felt the same overwhelming sense of completion he'd experienced on their original wedding day. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his kind eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses, "we gather today not to witness the beginning of a love story, but to celebrate its continuation. Richard and Claire Hale stand before us as proof that some bonds are stronger than death. Some hearts remember even when memory fails, and some love stories are too powerful to be ended by anything this world can devise." In the front pew, FBI agent Sarah Martinez dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She'd become an unlikely friend over the past months, helping navigate the legal complexities of Claire's resurrection while ensuring Veronica's conviction was airtight. Beside her sat James Crawford and his wife, the security chief having proven himself loyal beyond any paycheck when he'd helped orchestrate Veronica's capture. "The rings you exchanged today," the pastor continued, "carry extra meaning. They represent not just promises for the future, but vows that have already been tested by the worst circumstances imaginable and found unbreakable." Richard slipped the simple gold band onto Claire's finger, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "8 years ago, I thought I'd lost you forever. I promised at your memorial service that I'd love you until my dying breath, never imagining I'd get the chance to love you with living ones again. Claire, you are my miracle, my second chance, my proof that sometimes the impossible is just another word for faith." Claire's voice was softer, but no less certain as she placed Richard's ring. "I spent 8 years feeling incomplete, searching for something I couldn't name. Now I know I was searching for home, not a place, but the people who make me whole. Richard, Ethan, you are my anchor, my purpose, my reason for fighting my way back from the darkness. I promise to love you not just in this lifetime, but in whatever comes after, as they kissed to seal their renewed vows. The small congregation erupted in applause, but none louder than Ethan, who had grown 3 inches and gained in confidence that came from having his family truly complete. For the first time in his memory, the reception was held in the garden behind the Woodstock Inn, not the grand Hale property they'd once owned, but the charming country establishment Richard and Claire had purchased with the remnants of their liquid assets. It was smaller than their old empire, simpler, but it was theirs in a way the previous business had never been. Speech, called out Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the neurologist who'd helped Claire understand her memory recovery process. She'd become both a medical advisor and friend, marveling at Claire's brain's ability to rebuild neural pathways despite years of pharmaceutical interference. Richard stood, raising his glass of champagne as the crowd quieted. Most of you know our story by now. The crash, the amnesia, the sister who tried to rewrite our lives according to her own twisted vision. But what you might not know is what we've learned through all of this. He looked down at Claire, who was practically glowing in the golden afternoon light. We learned that love isn't just an emotion. It's a force that can reach across years of silence, pierce through artificial fog, and guide 2 souls back to each other no matter how lost they become. We learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to stand by you when the world falls apart. His gaze found Ethan, who was sitting with a group of local children who'd become his new friends. We learned that children see with their hearts in ways adults forget how to do. And most importantly, we learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. Claire stood beside him, her hand finding his naturally. 6 months ago, I was Olivia Grant, a woman with no past, no real identity, no anchor in the world. Today, I'm Claire Hale again. But more than that, I'm exactly who I was meant to be. A wife, a mother, a partner in building something meaningful rather than just profitable. She gestured toward the inn behind them, where guests were already checking in for the evening. This place represents our new beginning. We'll never be as wealthy as we once were, never have the power we once wielded, but we'll have something Veronica's empire never offered. The knowledge that everything we build is based on truth, love, and the kind of family bond that can't be bought or manipulated. As the afternoon stretched into evening, the celebration took on the relaxed atmosphere of a family gathering rather than a formal event. Children ran between tables while adults shared stories, and for the first time in 8 years, Richard felt genuinely at peace. Dad, Ethan appeared at his elbow as the sun began to set. Mom wants to show you something. Claire was standing by the garden gate, holding what looked like a small wrapped package. I have a wedding gift for you, she said, her smile mysterious. Claire, we agreed no gifts. We're still rebuilding financially. This didn't cost anything. She handed him the package, watching his face carefully as he unwrapped it. Inside was a home pregnancy test, the little window showing 2 pink lines. Richard stared at it for a long moment, the implications slowly sinking in. Are you, about 6 weeks along? I wanted to be sure before I told you. Claire's voice was soft, uncertain. I know it complicates things with everything we're dealing with. Richard swept her into his arms, spinning her around as laughter bubbled up from somewhere deep in his chest. Complicates things, Claire. This is the most perfect wedding gift in the history of wedding gifts. Ethan, who had been watching anxiously from nearby, broke into a grin. Does this mean I'm going to be a big brother? It means our family is growing, Claire said, pulling him into the embrace. It means this new life we're building together is already creating new life of its own, as the 3 of them stood together in the Vermont twilight, surrounded by the people who'd become their chosen family. None of them noticed the figure watching from the hills beyond the inn. But unlike the previous surveillance they'd endured, this observer was friendly. Agent Martinez, making her final security sweep before officially closing the case. She spoke quietly into her radio. All clear. The Hale family is safe, secure, and ready to write the next chapter of their story without interference. Later that night, after the guests had gone home or retired to their rooms, Richard and Claire walked hand in hand through their small inn. Turning off lights and checking that everything was secure, it was such a normal, domestic routine, so different from their old life of staff and security systems, but it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Any second thoughts? Claire asked as they reached their private quarters. About what? The business, the baby, the fact that my sister is spending life in prison for trying to murder my wife. Any of it, all of it. Richard stopped walking and pulled her into his arms, studying her face in the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window. Do you know what I was thinking during the ceremony today? What? I was thinking that some people get one great love in their lifetime if they're lucky. I got the same great love twice. Once when I was young and thought the world was simple, and once when I was old enough to understand how precious and fragile happiness really is. He touched her face gently. No regrets, Mrs. Hale, not a single one. Outside their window, Vermont's mountains stood eternal and protective, and in the distance, a church bell chimed midnight, marking the beginning of another day in their new life. The heart that never forgets had remembered its way home.